Hi, my name's Jim Hazelwood. I serve as the Bishop of the New England Synod. Um, so I'm here to introduce to you two videos, and they're different but the same. The ELCA Conference of Bishops has approved a new first call process. So this primarily pertains to seminary students who are about to enter their first call. We recorded two videos. One is a conversation with some candidates, an intern pastor, and a couple bishops about the new process. So we talk about it from their point of view. The second is a conversation with people who work in candidacy and leadership managers, seminaries, and a couple bishops to talk about it. These are designed to be educational, to help get questions that are being asked, discussed. We're engaged in a new way of doing this. It's an experiment, it's innovation, and it's not just like something that we're going to do for some number of years and then we're going to evaluate it. We're evaluating and learning already, and we're only a couple of weeks into this whole thing. So this is the same introduction for both videos, so you can scrub ahead if you want to, and watch each video and hopefully be really helpful. And if you need the link to the actual document, it's right underneath this YouTube. So enjoy. Thanks. Okay, so welcome. We have our own Hollywood Squares version of the new first call process. My name is Jim Hazelwood. I serve as Bishop of the New England Synod. My pronouns are he, him, his, and we are here today with an astute group of bishops, seminary folks, and candidacy and leadership managers for the purpose of providing this video for educational purposes as we live into this new first call process. And so after I ask everyone to introduce themselves, I'll give a brief overview, and then we'll go around the table and discuss this, and hopefully this will be helpful. So, John, would you go ahead and start?
Sure. I'm Bishop John Anderson. I serve in southwestern Minnesota, and it's great to be a part of the conversation.
Charles.
Dr. Charles Leonard from United Lutheran Seminary. I'm on the faculty there and the Director of Contextual Formation and the Candidacy Coordinator.
Paul.
I am Paul Baglios. I serve as Candidacy and Leadership Manager for Regions 7 and 8.
Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Current. I am the newly installed Bishop of Southeastern Iowa Synod, and previously, for the last decade, have served as the Vice President for Admissions and Student Services at Wartburg Seminary, where I was privileged to be part of the assignment consultation for the ELCA.
Kevin Strickland. I serve as the Bishop of the Southeastern Synod, which is Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Alabama, and have been doing this for a little over a year.
Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie Veen. I'm the Associate Director.
It's early.
I have,
Poor Leslie,
yeah,
it's
7
like
a.m.
4
for me.
o'clock in the morning on the West Coast.
I am the Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs for Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. Previously, I was the Director of Contextual Education, so I was putting all of that together as I tried to introduce myself. So I have been working with PLTS students since 2013, and I'm glad to be here as part of this conversation.
And Rami.
Hi, I'm Pastor Rami Bakken, and I'm the Region 5 Candidacy and Leadership Manager, and I live near Madison, Wisconsin.
And Shell.
I'm Deacon Shell Huth, and I serve United Lutheran Seminary as the Director of Field Formation, Lifelong Learning, Certificate Studies, Team Ministry Candidates, and Adjunct Faculty. Charles asked me to join in as I'm fairly new to the process, and any opportunity I can get to learn more is important for our institution.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being a part of this. So I'll give a brief introduction to this new first call process, and then we'll go around in the same order, give everybody a chance to give a reaction question that we can then discuss. That way we make sure everybody gets a chance. So we've got a tight timeline as we've got lots of people with busy schedules. So the reason we're here is the Conference of Bishops a couple of weeks ago at its October meeting passed a new, what used to be called assignment process is now called a first call process. And basically, in summary, when people say, well, what is this? What I tell them is it essentially moves what we used to call assignment from a national process to one that is primarily handled by the synods and the regions. That's essentially the shift that has happened. There's a document. For those of you that are watching the video, have not seen the document, the link is right below. You can download that. It's about, I don't know, 5 or 6 pages, something like that. Why did we do this? First of all, I think the assignment process that we had for the first 30 years of the ELCA served the denomination well, but as we all know, both the church and general life in society has changed. And in order to adopt to those changes throughout the years, the assignment process had added things like something called administrative assignment or restrictions. What we found in recent years is that while that was initially an exception, it started to become the norm. Whereas recently, I don't know the exact percentage, but I know that this past assignment process, well over 50, maybe even pushing 60 or 65% of the candidates had already been assigned prior to the actual gathering that we had in late September. So it was time to make a change. The Conference of Bishops put together a team, one bishop from each region. We consulted with a whole bunch of people, spent 6 months putting together this process. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We know it's not perfect. And I fully expect that there will be hiccups along the way. And part of what we're intending to do with this process is not only establish a new way going forward, but also to say we're going to evaluate as we go forward. So therefore, we will be making changes. This is not like a 3-year program and then at the end of 3 years, we'll evaluate and make changes. No, we will be making changes as we go along to help to improve it. And we want everybody to be a part of that. So that's just general introduction. Why don't we start with Bishop Anderson, who has probably the longest history of anybody, at least in the Conference of Bishops, of being a part of the assignment process. So it's good to have you, John. You're on mute.
One of the things that I wanted to share is that over the 16 years I've been a part of what was our past process, the assignment process, it actually was much more of a living thing than probably people who've only seen it in the last year or two are aware of. As we tried to adjust at times when we had too many candidates or had too few candidates, the way we approached the assignment process moved. So I assume that as we move forward into this process, that it will be a living process, that we're going to be making adjustments and reforming things as we go. As a bishop of a rural synod, a place where people don't necessarily imagine they might want to go and serve often, I had the privilege as a candidate when I came through seminary of actually leaving my culture and going to serve in a different place. So I went from rural Minnesota, dairy farmer kid, to corporate Northwest Houston and one of the largest churches of our church body at the time. And one of my questions is, how can we work together to help people imagine places they might serve that might help them to see the larger church and help students? That I'm concerned that we find ways to help candidates get to places that might take them some place different than where they've been. So that's one of the questions I have inside of me. How will we figure out how to do that?
I think that's a legitimate question. I'll just take a little bit of a comment on that, and then anybody else can respond. And then, so that was definitely, John, as you know, that was one of the big topics of conversation as we were putting together this new process. And that was a concern lifted up by other bishops in other settings, that how we used to have a system that really tried to focus in on that, and will this system continue to do that? I think that's one of the key evaluating questions going forward. I think that your experience of going someplace else is a big benefit. And the more that we can do that, and I know that seminaries are pretty intentional about trying to make sure that their candidates don't just simply have an internship experience that is very similar to the church that they grew up in. So I think that that's one way that we can look at this going forward. And a second, in the new process, there's that bishop consultation piece that happens. I've already had a couple conversations with bishops who are just kind of starting to live into this. And one of the things that we need to be intentional, and this is where I think a lot of this falls to us as bishops, is as we have those conversations with those candidates before they are approved, is that we lift opportunities up, so that it's not just me as the New England bishop trying to get people to play on my team if I can only have that $1 million signing bonus. But I think also lifting up, look, you're in a situation, if the person is, where you can be flexible. Why not consider your first call, especially in some of those synods that offer student loan debt relief? I would think that would be an attractive option. So those are two thoughts that I have. I don't know if anybody else wants to add something.
Well, I think what I'd add is I think we can do it in the new system as well. I just want to advocate for it inside our new game that we're putting together. Thanks.
Good. All right. Charles. You're a little mute.
A question that I have would be, would there still be a need for the Pentecost group? And I think I'm thinking about people who were having a difficult time trying to find a place for. I know that that category might continue on, but then I would ask how long would that particular person in that type of situation, how long are they permitted to remain in that Pentecost group before we have to move forward with other actions? And with now that they're going to the bishop, their home bishop would be responsible to help them find a place. I'm just wondering what would the role of the Pentecost group be? Would it be valid anymore?
Good question. And people that are watching this are going, what is the Pentecost
What is it?
group? I'll take a crack at it. So the Pentecost group is not some secret Gnostic society. What it is when candidates complete their rostered ministry profile, and then in the past system, they would be assigned to a synod. And if after some extensive attempts to have that candidate in a call process where it's then unsuccessful, what has happened is a bishop will put their RMP into, it's an online portal, think monster.com/Pentecost group in the ELCA, that's accessible by bishops and I believe associates, so that the bishops typically then, what I've seen is sent an email out to all the bishops of the ELCA saying, so-and-so who was assigned to my synod and we were unsuccessful to place them in a call is in the Pentecost group, have a look. And what I do, and others can comment, is I go in and then download that RMP and then have my staff person who handles mobility look at that and see if there's some opportunities. So that's what the Pentecost group is. I wonder how much that's going to be used going forward. I think that's going to be one of the learnings, because in the new system, a candidate that comes out of the New England Synod, for me, stays as my responsibility until they receive a call. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is going to generate more proactivity in terms of call process, because I have a responsibility. And what I say and will say to all of the candidates in New England Synod, look, I know you wanted to be in a call process in southern Minnesota and it didn't work out, but let's be in touch with one another. And so it's going to fall more to me And I think lays a little bit more ownership, especially because as a bishop, this is somebody that came through my candidacy process. So that's what I'm hopeful for. Those are my thoughts. Anybody else want to respond to that question regarding the Pentecost group?
I think that the Pentecost group, or something very much like it, could be a way for bishops working with candidates for whom there may not be an immediate open call opportunity to vet the availability of those candidates more widely geographically throughout the ELCA.
Yep. Charles, does that help to get your
Yes.
question? All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Amy, yeah.
However, what I'm thinking about with that is that in this process, the first call process, the regional gatherings could also be helpful there. That would eliminate the need for the Pentecost group. I'm hopeful for, in that we might have more active conversations that continue rather than, as it's been, kind of twice a year. The candidacy and leadership managers have always met often, and the regions have been meeting, but with this new process, there'll be so much more intentionality that maybe we'll be able to keep these candidates engaged, and so they don't have the experience of feeling like they've been shelved or put in a group, but instead are in more regular conversation. That's my hope, and I'm really hopeful for that with this new process.
Yeah, I think you're right. I will also say the Pentecost group has received scant activity over the years. I mean, I would have to say, and you know, John or Kevin, because you've been a part of this, like that maybe at most there's been 1 or 2 people in there for a period of time. It's been really, really unused or underutilized. So I think you're right, Amy, because this will be more happen on a regional basis. There'll be some more intentionality. Okay, so Paul Baglios, you're up next.
So Bishop Hazelwood, when we were prepping for this, asked each of us maybe to give a statement and then a question. Here's my statement. I'm hoping for many good things to come from this new experiment, one of which, dear to my heart, is that this might eliminate or otherwise minimize and reduce periods of undue delay that candidates often experience in between the day of their approval and the day that they receive and accept their first call. Assignment as we have done it has often involved approved candidates enduring months before they ever get the chance to interview with the call committee. And I'm hoping that that will be over for the sake of our candidates ready to serve and our congregations and other ministries that need them. Here's my question. I have already been fielding numerous questions related to this. One of those that is most immediate to my work responsibilities in the ELCA comes from candidates asking, okay, so now I'm approved. What do I have to do right now to begin to move toward interview for first call? In particular, candidates are wanting to know what kinds of forms must I complete and submit. The ministry profile will remain a vital and valuable tool for use in our ELCA, but what other sorts of paperwork must candidates attend to in order that they can be, as soon as possible, scheduled to meet with call committees?
The form question. Good one. So short answer, two things. One is in the in-between time, which we're always in the in-between time, but that's more of a theological statement than it is a structural statement. So between now, we're recording this in mid-October, and January 31st, the current system stays in place. So people should fill out their ABC, their profile, all of that. and they are then working with their bishops, what I'll call home synod bishop, the Synod of Candidacy, and they can be in touch with their bishop or the assigned staff person. And that if they are ready to go and approved during that time, they would go through what is an administrative assignment process. And rather than spending a lot of time on what that is, I'll just direct them to their bishops. And obviously people like you, Paul, and Rami, and people that work in the Candidacy and Leadership Manager area. So that's in the in-between time. During this time, we are developing a new form. The intent is to take form A, B, and C, get what we need out of it, get rid of what we don't need out of it, and make one smaller form that's currently called Form X. That does not mean that it will be called Form X. It's just, that's what we're calling it. And so folks at Churchwide, Aaron Daubert, Charlene Beck, and others, and many candidacy leadership managers, and all of you and seminary folks, and so will have input into what that form is. My driving push on that form is for simplification. We always want to add, well, there's this one more question that's really important. And it is really important, whatever that additional question is, but then we end up with a 30-page form that nobody reads. Correction. John Anderson reads all of the forms because he's really good and loyal in that department. But somebody like me looks at the name and I want to make a telephone conversation. So that's where we will go. There will be a form, but hopefully it will be more simplified. That help?
We are the ELCA. We love a good form.
Yeah. The other form that will continue is form, I forget what number it is, but it's the form that the seminary provides, but that's really more in a candidacy process, but it does overlap into this because it provides information from the seminary to the candidacy committee, and then that form is part of the packet. So it would then go into being a piece of information that could be a part of the package, if you will, of information about a candidate. So that will continue.
Form D.
Form D, thank you. I'm still working on my 1040, so I can't get all my forms straight. So, all right, good. I'm gonna move us along. Amy, current.
Yeah, thank you. I have had, as many in this group know, I've had mixed feelings about this move to a new process. But as I've been reading now the pages that the Conference of Bishops approved, I have been gaining some energy around this. It could be shift and roll. I'm gonna name that part of my grief as a person working with the seminary was trying to figure out how the seminaries would continue to have an active partnership role with our candidates that we have, that we had nurtured and walked alongside. And so I trust that that will just be reshaped and we'll figure it out, as you say, Jim, as we learn and adapt and go along. I'm going to take us a little different direction though with my question, which is one of the concerns that I have had is on the other end of the process, and which is at the beginning. And my hope for this first call process is that we will figure out as a church how to joyfully speak about this process in order to lift up and encourage candidates. My concern is, and this isn't pointing fingers or anything like that because I have no experience in this, but my concern has been if we have more of a regional process for first call process, then will there be a settling into only lifting up candidates that a particular synod needs for themselves? And I don't believe that to be true. I don't think theologically that's how we believe. I don't think that's how the Holy Spirit works, but we're humans. and we want to fill our needs. And so I have really been concerned about ways that we can, as a church, speak about this and start to tell stories once we're a year or so in, so that we can actually invigorate the process of lifting up candidates for rostered ministry in our church. And then being aware that for the bishops and the candidacy committees, that there may be an increased awareness of what entrance means in this process, and that what we might be doing is beginning with more vigorous conversation at the beginning of the process, and getting potential candidates more eager to serve in the church. And that's the part where I'm really excited, but we need the candidates to be excited in order to join in this ministry. So any thoughts around that? That's really where my heart has been.
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, for that question. It's a great question. Our group of 9 that worked on this new process talked about the very thing. Myself in Southeastern Synod, and or I should say our Synod, not myself, and North Carolina Synod, we have, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the most candidates right now in candidacy. Southeastern has 98 people in candidacy. I do not have 98 calls for people. I won't have 98 calls when they all finish seminary. To your point about entrance, though, this is where I think on the upfront of things, the candidacy committees, bishops and bishop staff, and our regional folk, we have to put a lot more onus on those folks early on to say, friends, you're entering into this process, but it's a call of the whole church. Because even with the former process, some of the major problems were people did not want to leave the house they owned because of their spouse having a job or kids or medical issues. And I hear all that. The problem is, if you're in a synod like mine that has 98 candidates, you have to know coming into this that you will not get a call, most likely, back to this synod. And so our push and entrance is to say, if the Holy Spirit is calling you to be a pastor or a deacon in this church, it's for the church, not just for Atlanta, Georgia, or wherever. And so I do think that's a huge piece of this. But I think it also just can't be said at entrance. It has to be said again at endorsement, because when people are about ready to go on internship, there's a whole lot of pushback from not wanting to go on an internship that's out of that geographic area because of all the other reasons I just named. And they're all valid reasons. I'm not discounting that. But I think to John Anderson's point, to have that experience outside of that geographic comfort zone, it's huge. And a lot of people can't afford that, and a lot of people don't always have that. But for me personally, I mean, John, I had a similar experience. I went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida for internship, and I grew up in South Carolina. I had never left South Carolina. That multicultural experience of being in South Florida was just transformative for me. Now, after that, I didn't want to go back to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was just too hot. But it was a transformative experience. So, Amy, I think to your point, this is where Conference of Bishops is going to have to work a lot harder together. So our 2 times a year meeting is just not going to cut it, which is why region groups are going to have to meet more. Right now, during this pandemic, we're meeting weekly. I think that's been a huge benefit, but I think if we continue that trend, we're not going to necessarily need a Pentecost group if we can meet more often and say, friends, I've got this great candidate. And we say that 6 months prior, so we already give a heads up, so that John Anderson can say that person would fit great, in such and such city in Minnesota. So anyway, I think part of what I hope this will do for us is it will make us a more communicative church. It will involve more people who aren't involved. But like Jim Hazelwood said, it's not perfect. And so it's going to have to take some time to work out the kinks. But I see this as a living document that we live into and we change as we need. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, and living, and some people have mentioned, well, not some people, I've made the comparison to, this will probably be like the candidacy manual. It will be updated frequently, but it's going to be updated from us, and I say us is all of us on this, what we represent. So before we get to Kevin Strickland, it looks like Paul Baglios wants to add something to this part of the conversation.
Yes, and I'll do this briefly. On my screen, sharing a row are Bishops Anderson, Current, and Strickland. Each of them in their most recent comments has made reference to internship. One of the tasks that I believe is vital for the ELCA in addressing some of these observations and concerns that these bishops have raised is that we must multiply internship sites across the ELCA. We must find ways to have more and more and more congregations called into the wondrous ministry of serving as learning communities for candidates in their internship period. And we must find ways to have those opportunities not be reliant solely upon the familiar stipendiary requirements.
All right. So let's move on to Bishop Strickland.
Yeah,
I'm so used to people calling people by their first name, and then I end up on this kind of thing, and I like, what should I, Reverend, the right Reverend? Oh, we don't use, anyway.
yeah, Kevin's fine.
Kevin.
One of the, Jim, you asked us to make a comment. I want to make a comment first. I'm hesitantly hopeful about this process. And the reason I'm hesitant about it is because anytime we do anything new in the ELCA, it takes us forever to do it. However, for this, I'm grateful that it hasn't taken us forever to have this conversation. That's where my hopefulness comes. I'm also hesitant because it's not just about a first call process, it's about changing a culture. And so this is what leads to my question. Not just in the South, not just in the Midwest, but across the whole ELCA, we have congregations that not just for a first call person, but any aged person or experienced person will not interview or say they won't interview an LGBTQIA person or have issues with a woman in ministry, even though we've been ordaining women in ministry for 50 years, those who are Caucasian, and 40, those who are African American. They even won't say this out loud, but have issues with people with disabilities. My concern with that is, I don't think that it matters what process we change. We have got to change the culture. And so when congregations say, oh, Bishop, I want this great young pastor who's got 30 years of experience and is great at youth ministry, but also a great administrator and preaches really well and will solve all the problems of our church. And then we bring them that person who is almost as close to a Messiah as you can get. And then they push back and say, oh, Bishop, that person's an African-American female who identifies as queer. That's just not going to cut it in our congregation. I think we have to work harder at that. And I think that if we're going to be a denomination that says we welcome people to use the gifts that God has given them, it doesn't matter what first call process we create or any other process. We, and I mean we as a whole church, have got to do the hard work of identifying the isms that get in our way, or else we're going to continue to have people who are going to wait a year or 2 years or 3 years, or I heard one situation recently, 4 years for a first call. And so my question with this is, right now it states that the candidate stays in the Synod of their candidacy. My concern that I've heard, and it's also a concern that I have, is what happens when you have a candidate, and let's just use an example, who identifies as LGBTQ, and they're in a synod where they've had a really rough candidacy. Geographically, they're in a synod where they know that they're most likely not going to get a call in that synod and didn't ask to be in that synod. But they go through the first call process that we have now. They don't get an assignment. They don't have anywhere to go to interview. They revert back to their home synod with that home bishop, who they may already have an issue with. Does that actually make the wait worse? Or how do we solve that? And I think, like for me, I advocate on people's behalfs and will continue to do that. I even push congregations to say, no, I really think you're going to interview these folks, or we're just going to wait a little longer on some name giving. But at the same time, I mean, what happens with that situation where you have that person? And that's the one piece of this that I don't think we fully have worked out. And it's the one piece of this that's where I say I'm hesitantly hopeful, because I think as we live into this, we've got to work that out. So that was a bit of a sermon, but also a question. I'm not sure how to work that out as part of my other frustration, because I think there's more of a systemic issue that we really have to get to the core of. But I wanted to name that because that question has come to me. And I just wanted to throw that out there and see if anyone has anything that we can at least start to tease out as an answer.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And when I did this Zoom with some folks who are candidates and intern supervising pastors, they raised that as well. I do think that's a challenge, and I think you're right. It's not that I don't know that we're going to solve these things by administrative technical solutions, processes. But what I will say is that I believe that this new process forces more accountability among bishops, because for me, I am now accountable to my colleagues in Region 7, and there will be open conversations about candidates much more frequently. We've never talked about candidates, up with the other process. So I'm hopeful in that area that we can address that. I'm also really learned a lot in terms of LGBTQ candidates, because New England has had a long history of being very open and welcome to such candidates. And that, I'll be honest, that has really, up until just recently, spared New England from the so-called clergy shortage that other parts of the country have experienced. But I also recognize that it's not an option for everybody to move to New England. Nor do people want to become Red Sox fans, much less Patriot fans, although it's a little easier now that Tom Brady's not here anymore. But I do think, you raise a good question, that I think attentiveness across the ELCA is going to be the way to go. Anybody else have any thoughts before we get to that? Oh, he's got his Baltimore Ravens.
I just would push back a little bit on that. I disagreed with this when Bishop Eaton said it out loud. I don't agree that we have a clergy shortage, or rather, more faithfully, a roster minister shortage. I think our issue is exactly what I named. I think we have an issue with people not wanting to claim the wholeness of the individual. And when I said we need to deal with isms, the Conference of Bishops is going to have to also deal with their own isms and their own lack of not wanting to deal with conflict, because it's deemed conflicted when we have to push a congregation to say, no, you really need to interview a woman, or no, you really should interview this person who has a disability, or no, this person happens to be queer, but my goodness, they have a lot of gifts. So I'm not sold on we have a clergy shortage, especially when I have 98 people in candidacy who are wanting to serve the whole church. I think we have an issue with the isms that we're not wanting to deal with.
John.
Yeah, and I think we'll need to talk a little bit about structures defining what is a first call and what is ordainable. There are ways in which our system blocks congregations from actually experiencing the gifts of LGBTQ person, or a Black, Indigenous, or person of color. I mean, that's, and we've had success getting candidates calls, but we've needed to work on the relational level and their structural level. And then Kevin, we've had to advocate, like you've said, and we far from regularly are winning that conversation, but we're having it. And I think we got to keep after that.
I'm watching the clock and wanting to make sure that everybody has a voice here. So I'm going to move this on. Leslie?
Thank you. Coming from a seminary that has for the last 8 years had what is called a capstone or final year internship, I'm very thankful for this possibility to shorten the time, I guess, between when they are completing their internship and when they can actually get a first call and start serving. So I am definitely with Paul on that one. I am very appreciative of all the questions that have come before. One that really weighs on my heart is the question of power dynamics. We are asking these students, these candidates, to speak on their behalves. And much, you know, it's come up in other questions as well, but they're not always feeling completely free to do that for whatever reason. And we are really relying on them to be honest and open about what they are able to do and what they want to do, and yet they are at such a disadvantage power-wise. So I wonder, how does this system, this new process, allow for that power dynamic to be named and to be mitigated in any kind of way?
Good question. This came up with the candidates as well, and Bishop Sue Briner, who and I were a part of that Zoom, and we made note of this question to figure out a way to more formally address it within the process. Neither she nor I had any quick or easy answers to that question. But I think it's good you named it. One of the candidates named it as well, and is something that beyond, you know, any of us saying something nice and positive right now, which might sound nice and positive, there was a question of how do we build that in, including a question, is there some kind of, I forgot exactly how it was, and I don't want to use, but an appeal process, you know, of some sort that a candidate could say, look, this is just not working, and I believe I have, you know, gifts to serve, and is there somebody else that can come in? And maybe, I think maybe that's an early conversation for bishops to have on a regional basis. But as well as, you know, candidacy and leadership managers, they play an integral part in the whole candidacy process, and then the seminaries. So how can we come up with something built into the structure for that? But yeah, you're the second person to name that, Leslie, and thanks for doing that. So, John.
I know I've spoken a few times, but early in the process, I've advocated that we actually need to do a deep analysis of how sin functions in this structure. The sin that I can manifest it as a candidate, the sin that the congregations can manifest as they're not looking at candidates, the way the structures of the national church body function to encourage or discourage. I mean, I think one of the things we're going to come out of this experience with COVID about just the whole journey that we're in right now is we become more aware of the brokenness of people and the brokenness of systems. And so I think we just need to name that, because bishops are not sinless. Synod staffs are not sinless. The ELCA is not. On the other hand, we're all working together and trying to hold each other accountable. I think that's something we've talked about trying to manage this, and I'll stop to let others speak.
Well, I think, and thank you for putting it in theological language, because I think that's also really helpful for us. I want to move on to Rami.
Rami, but that's
Rami,
okay.
sorry, I'll get it
Okay.
within
it's okay,
5
Joms.
Just like Amy, only longer.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the thing that I've been focusing on with students is, when I've been getting questions, is to remind them of the things that are staying the same. Because I think when there's some changes to just help kind of settle and focus us. And so I just want to bring that up again. We've been talking about a lot of what ifs, and to remind students that they'll still fill out a roster administrator profile. There'll still be a short form to introduce them to the other synods. They will still work with a synod on their first call process. And there is a bishop there and their staff that's going to help walk them through that. So those are some things I want to point out. And then my question is very similar to Leslie's, and that is, what's the appropriate amount of agency that a student would have, that a candidate would have in the first call process? And I'm going to start to answer it, and I invite you to answer as well. Well, their agency is in introducing themselves to the bishop and to a call committee in terms of their paperwork. Their agency is in being in communication with their synod bishop and with their regional coordinator with questions or concerns that they have. And then with the seminary candidacy coordinator, who can also help be an avenue of communication for them if they've got some questions or some nervousness about what's happening out there.
I think that those are all excellent points, and that people, one of the things we know as people who have served in congregations, you need as a pastor or deacon to claim that agency. Because if you don't, it's going to be rough for you in ministry. And here's a place to begin to do that. Not that you wouldn't have started that earlier in life. But you also have advocates, as you just named, which I think is really key. And I think that students probably need to be encouraged more in this new process to work with their candidacy and leadership managers, to work with even in their own candidacy committees. I assume that most synods have some kind of a relator, and there's also the people, the seminary folks. And if the candidate is nervous about that initial conversation with a bishop, well, they should reach out to, the people I just named and say, how do I talk to a bishop, And well, they brush their teeth just like everybody else. So first of all, let's start there. But I think that's really good that you name that. And we should actually use this as an opportunity to encourage that agency. Rami, I want to move on to Shell because I know a couple of people have to go and we're coming up on the clock. But thanks for naming that.
Thanks so much, Bishop. And thank you for debunking the notion that bishops brush their teeth just like everybody else. I'll have to spend some time thinking about that one, and that's just blown my mind. Thank you very much. I like the accountability component of this new process. I think that there's greater accountability across the board on all the entities engaged in this. And I think that that's a real benefit. I also lift up the things that my colleagues have all said about the movement of the process, our candidates not kind of wallowing for months until the next assignment process happens. We have 381 students at ULS, and every single one of them has their own individualized education plan and path. And so gone are the days of everybody being on the same path on the same timeline. And so I think this is a really good thing for the church. And I'm really excited about working to move into this new way of doing things. I also echo Bishop Strickland's concerns in regards to people out of the norm stream, to say it in a really crass way. But that's really, the white normative, male normative too. We need to work at that as a church. And so how are we going to continue to do that work within our own realms and within this process so that we can help move people into the places that God is calling them?
Thank you. I know a couple of things before we go. We're kind of at a transition point here. I know Bishop Strickland needs to leave us in about 60 seconds. And he had a question beforehand that I want to get to. And also I got a couple of private messages. I can't read them because they show up on the video. And so, but I want those to be lifted up. But so I want to go to Kevin and then other conversations, and then we'll go like another 5 or 8 minutes and then go. So Kevin, anything you want to say before you have to leave?
No, I think I'm appreciative of this conversation, and thanks for calling us together. I think we just need to do more of these. And I think the mindfulness needs to be that synods and synod staffs change almost every year. Not all synods, but we're seeing more and more changes of bishops and synod staffs and seminaries. So I think we need to just be mindful of, we can't assume people know the information, and because this is new, some of it, we just have to do a better job of communicating, all of us, with that. But I'm grateful for this conversation and more than happy to be, again, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, good.
Hesitantly hopeful, but thank you. I need to leave.
All right. All right, so he's going to go, and I was hoping he was going to ask his question about first call processes. But so, John, you and he were talking before we started recording. Let's make sure we get to that. Anybody else want to say anything? Anybody that chatted me that I can't read what you said? You want to add what you want to say now?
I was one of those people, and really I think this is just part of learning as we go. And so I had two suggestions that came to my mind as we were sitting here, and they are not necessarily for candidates and might not be helpful to this conversation, but for as we move forward, and as I reflect on my former role in the seminary world, I think there would be two things that could be helpful as we start this first call process. One would be a conversation with contextual education directors at the seminaries, especially related to all the conversation here around internship and opening people's imagination. And so that already happens at the seminaries, and they're very intentional about that. But I do think internship supervisors are going to have lots of questions about this, especially as it relates to evaluations and how to communicate with their interns as they anticipate this first call process. So I think equipping our contextual ed folks would be helpful. And then I think the other piece is, I know, Jim, that you mentioned having a meeting for seminary candidacy folks. And I think one of the things to help them understand is the role. I think there's lots of questions still about that, unless this was clarified a couple weeks ago at a meeting I wasn't able to attend. But just what is the role for the seminary people? We mentioned being an advocate. We mentioned being a resource or a conversation partner for our candidates as they prepare for this. But I think that will be really important, and especially because of all the turnover. This isn't, and to keep, like Kevin said, keep having that conversation so people really are aware of it. It's been easier to know our role when the assignment consultations have been regular, and we've kind of learned together, but that will be a little bit more diverse now.
Right.
So thanks, that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, those are really two very good suggestions. And when I speak with Sherlyn and Aaron, we'll take those up. One other thing that I wanted to get to, I think it was actually important, John, you and Kevin were talking about how first call processes work in different parts of the country. And I think if you want to articulate what you said, and then I'll try to capture what he said, because I think Kevin's practice is similar to ours, which maybe is a more Eastern part of the country dominant practice. So go ahead.
So different parts of our church body approach the first call in different ways. So in the Midwest, it's common for people to present multiple candidates to a congregation. That's what congregations expect. That's how we normally operate. In this process right now, it says that we would only present a single name. So I just wondered about that. Are we going to have regional flexibility about that? Or do we in the Midwest primarily, or other synods that do that, do we need to move into alignment with what more West Coast and East Coast? That's my, where I think I hear this is pretty predominant. But this way that we're actually working with a first call candidate as they interview is a thing that we're going to have to sort out. How's that for queuing it up, Jim?
Yeah, that's perfect, because we in New England and most, I don't know about all, but most of the Eastern synods, at least in Region 7, and it sounded like what from Kevin was saying, do one candidate at a time. And our thinking behind that has been that actually is a source of advocacy for the candidate, so that we're not putting a first call candidate up against somebody with 5 or 10 years of experience. So that has been the thinking behind why we have done that. I think that one of the things that you raised to articulate what Kevin was saying is that maybe it's not that you in the Midwest need to do what we're doing with the single candidate, but maybe we also need to evaluate what's the downside of that system. And maybe we need to look at giving candidates multiple options. Would that help, and how would that impact the whole piece?
Yeah, so I think we're just going to have a little bit of a holy wrestling match about that and sort that out. Because our goal is to get people to the place God needs them to be. And our goal is also, I think in the Midwest, people would feel like if we tried to universalize what's in the paperwork here, they'd feel like we're being compelled to engage in a way of doing church that's counter to what they've done, which will set up resistance. So, and that's hard to imagine if you've operated in the other system. In our world, first call candidates usually beat 5-year experienced people because there's a preference for first call people. So, I mean, it's just we live in a wonderfully diverse church, and this is just one little thing we're going to have to work on.
Right. I do think, to just say and to name, there's a lot of flexibility in this new system from region to region.
Yep.
So there is not an expectation that there will be a universal way of doing this going forward. I'm mindful of time, mostly because one of the feedbacks I'm getting from my rostered leaders in New England is Zoom fatigue. And also we've run about an hour, but I do want to give anybody, if they've got anything new or different or unique that they'd like to add as a part of a closing part of this conversation. Amy's got her hand up.
Where will we find this video and how will it be released?
This will be in the Pentecost group. No.
YouTube.
Yeah, it's going to be on YouTube, and there'll be it'll be available on the ELCA website, but I will send it out and get links available to everybody, as well as the one that I did with candidates. And by the way, there was also an intern pastor, Leslie from that works with you, Mark Perry, was a part of that as well. All right, good. Thank you. This was a great first start. And I think one of the things that I've mentioned or heard is that, this is the beginning of a conversation. And the more we do that, if COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us how we can use these tools to interact with each other and learn from one another. So I want to thank you all. Yeah, thanks everybody.